The BYU Cougars have their man, and it is Kevin Young taking over as BYU men's basketball head coach. Who is he? What does he offer to the Cougars? And why do I believe this is a bigger celebration of BYU athletics overall? I'll explain on today's show.
You are Locked On Cougars, your daily podcast on the BYU Cougars. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What's up, everybody? I'm Jake Hatch, your host here on Locked On Cougars, your resident BYU insider. Thank you for making Locked On Cougars your first listen of the day. Appreciate all of you who are everydayers with us right here on the Locked On Podcast Network. The motto is your team every day, and as such, this is your original daily podcast focused on all things BYU. All right, most of you know this. If you don't already, you've been under a rock or 1,000 leagues under the sea, whatever that terminology, 20,000 leagues under the sea. Kevin Young has been hired as BYU basketball's new head coach. Now, I will say this at the outset. I think this is a monumental hire for the BYU basketball program. I talked on our most recent edition talking about what I thought a guy like Chris Burgess was the right man for the job at BYU. And it appears, based on all the reports / what I have heard and or vetted myself, is that Kevin Young was the apple of the eye when this search began for BYU. Now, in the interest of full disclosure, when Mark Pope stepped aside to be the head coach at Kentucky, I had a list of guys, and Kevin Young was naturally on that list in terms of options for BYU as their head coach. But never in a million years did I think that he would be interested in taking a job at the collegiate level. Think about it. This is a guy who spent 2 years of his entire coaching career so far in college, and they were the first 2 years that he essentially was a full-time head coach. So he's been 15 years in the NBA. He's been a head coach at the G League level. Oh, by the way, he's the finalist. He's one of the 3 finalists for the Brooklyn Nets job, and also was considered to be in contention for the Charlotte Hornets job as a head coach in the NBA. In my mind, why in the world does this guy want to come back to college? And I kind of just, I admit, I just kind of just dismissed it and said, you know what? It is what it is. Then Sunday, I had a couple of people reach out and say, hey, pay attention to the name Kevin Young. And you know who you are. A number of you do watch and or listen to this podcast who are filling me in on things. Trust me, we have a lot of folks. We have a lot of folks out there, folks. Okay, that watch this and or consume this podcast who are in positions of power and in the know, as you might say. And they were telling me, hey, watch this name. He is a guy that BYU's intent on bringing to BYU if at all possible. Then things heated up on Monday, and then Tuesday it got really crazy. Trust me, if you saw the text messages, the DMs, the phone calls I took and was sending out and making and all that stuff, you'd just be floored. And I came to the conclusion that it felt like BYU was intent on landing a deal with Kevin Young, but it wasn't done. So Tuesday night, when I sat down to record my podcast, that's the most recent edition, a number of you watched it, I was talking about Chris Burgess and why I believe he was the right man for the job. Then I spent a significant portion of the podcast also talking about Kevin Young and said he's a name to file away in this search. I got done with that podcast, sat down and saw a message from one of my tried and true sources saying, hey, Kevin Young's absolutely in the mix here. Then Wednesday morning comes around. Same source reaches out. Pay attention to this. It's heating up. And then I had another person who, out of the blue, who I trust because the person I talked to, they would know, said, Kevin Young's the man. And I'm like, whoa, okay, well, this is coming all together. And then formally the announcement comes. The reason I think this is a big hire for the BYU basketball program with all that backstory there is because this is a bona fide coach that is going to surprise people with his decision to step down, quote unquote, from the NBA and enter the college coaching ranks. He has not coached in college in 15 years. Like I said, he's a finalist for a head coaching position, at least one in the NBA this offseason. He's interviewed for multiples in the past couple of years. He's the highest paid assistant in the NBA at $2 million. Well, according to the reports, Matt Norlander, I believe is the first with it on CBSSports.com, said that the deal, the financial package that BYU put together to get Kevin Young to Provo is 7 years and somewhere in the vicinity of $30 million. Now, I think all of you can do division and you're thinking, okay, that's north of $4 million annually. Yes, it is an incredible financial commitment from BYU, but more importantly, is an important financial commitment from BYU boosters led by Ryan Smith. Now, Ryan Smith, the owner of the Utah Jazz and the soon-to-be renamed Arizona Coyotes NHL franchise, obviously is all in on sports in Utah. The best part about this is he's a BYU guy through and through. And I know that irks Utah fans to no end, but it makes for all the more hilarity. And he was a big reason why BYU A was able to narrow in on Kevin Young in the first place, and B, ultimately land the guy that they wanted. Matt Norlander reported this as well, that BYU has an institutional rule typically for any open position on campus. You have to interview at least 3 candidates for the job. The only formal interview for this position as BYU basketball head coach went to Kevin Young. There were exploratory conversations with people like Chris Burgess. I can say that confidently, that there were talks with those individuals, but no formal interviews were conducted outside of the interview that Kevin Young did. BYU made an exception and pushed this whole timeline into warp speed as compared to what BYU had done in the past. I believe it was 2 weeks to get Mark Pope hired the last time BYU had a vacancy at their men's basketball position, and I thought that was dragging on way too long. If I'm not mistaken, the Kalani Sitake thing took at least 2 weeks, maybe a month, to get him locked in. So the fact that BYU did this in essentially a week's time span, I got to give him a round of applause to all involved. Shane Reese, Keith Vorking, Tom Holmoe, obviously Kevin Young, Brian Santiago's in the mix there as well. And then obviously whoever from the Board of Trustees of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints who greenlight all hires of this magnitude for BYU. They had to be involved. I applaud all of those that were involved in this. But the other thing about this is, you heard me say that he's going to be making north of $4 million annually. Folks, BYU is finally starting to realize, you know what it takes to be competitive at the Power 5 / now the Power 4 level? Money. It requires greenbacks. It requires dinero. I don't care what. It requires money to be at the top, if not near the top of the Big 12 and in Power 5 sports. There is a financial component that BYU is finally starting to realize, and they're starting to act like the big boys that they are. Yes, it takes obviously donors like Ryan Smith. And by the way, Danny Ainge, very much involved in this because Danny knows Kevin Young. He mentioned it at a press conference I was at shortly after the news broke of Kevin Young, saying I tried to hire him 10 years ago to run our G League operation with the Boston Celtics. That's the main Red Claws out there in the Pacific, not the Pacific Northwest, the Northeast. And he said that I've been very high on him since that time. Now, Danny played very, very coy. Oh, they hired him? I think it's a great hire. Danny, we know you were involved. The reports out there say that you absolutely were helping push this through for BYU. The good news is it's good to have guys like Danny Ainge and Ryan Smith in the mix for BYU. They obviously have the financial backing with a guy like Ryan Smith, as along with other boosters. Let's be clear that Ryan doesn't do this just all on his own typically, but there are financially motivated boosters who wanted to get this done. And the fact that BYU is willing to pony up $4+ million for their next basketball coach, they are finally entering what I believe is a new era of BYU athletics. Yes, the financial windfall that's coming BYU's way via the media rights for the Big 12 is one thing, but it's nice to see BYU saying, you know what? Let's invest in sports. Let's actually get the people we want in place and let them go do their thing. So I am very, very excited for the future of BYU athletics. And let me just also add a little tidbit here. I am fully anticipating, and I can't say that I would be able to report on it in any way, shape, or form, but if BYU's basketball coach is making north of $4 million, you know who's expecting a nice tidy raise in the short term would be one Kalani Sitake. Now, you can argue that it's apples to oranges comparison, but football coaches, even at Kentucky, remember, Coach Calipari, speaking of John Calipari, who just left Kentucky, opening the door for Mark Pope, he was actually making less annually than their football coach, Mark Stoops, even though Kentucky basketball is considered to be the big dog on campus at Kentucky. So if BYU as a quote-unquote football school is what they are, guess what? Kalani Sitake is in line to have his hand out saying, hey, you're paying that guy how much? Well, let's talk about my deal over here. So good times at BYU. I embrace, I applaud. I cannot thank BYU administration for realizing that athletics, BYU basketball is one of the chief ones among them, is the front porch of the university. They are going to attract thousands, if not millions of eyeballs. Invest in them. Put the money back where it is coming out of and let those programs go out there and be the big dog that you want them to be. No longer are we dealing with the BYU of yesteryear where it was, we do more with less. you know what? Do more with more. That's what I wanted BYU to do. You guys who are everydayers on this podcast, who've been watching and or listening and commiserating with me for 5+ years now, know how much of a broken record I've been on this topic. It's a sore topic for me. It has been for years. I am here to say today that I am no longer going to complain about it, because BYU, they are finally putting the money where their mouth is. And I cannot emphasize enough how important that is if BYU truly wants to be a player in the Big 12 and on the national scene in athletics. So congratulations are in order to Kevin Young, as well as the BYU athletic department, on getting this hire done. What does it mean for the BYU staff? What is Kevin Young going to do for BYU in the interim? Because he is sticking with the Phoenix Suns through the however long they're in the NBA playoffs. We'll dig into that next, right here on Locked On Cougars. Today's show is brought to you by our friends over at Monopoly Go. Now, Monopoly Go here, my friends, is to help you guys out with your competitive streak. I have been told I am a fairly competitive person. My wife and I, we love to just poke and prod one another. It's just something that makes our relationship dynamic go. The best part is, if you want to have some fun with that, you can have fun with your friends by playing Monopoly Go. It's been downloaded over 150 million times on mobile devices. A great twist on Monopoly. We play not on one, but hundreds of Monopoly boards in crazy locations, building up amazing cities and bringing you in big money in the game. The best part is, you can mess with your friends and have a lot of fun along the way. You can charge them rent on your properties, just like classic Monopoly, but you also can rob their vaults of the riches for yourself. You can be a bank robber in this version, for lack of a better term, with Monopoly Go. And the best part is, leaderboards show who the biggest Monopoly tycoon is, so you can go, raid their bank and cash in yourself. It's not just my competitive side that loves it. You can team up with your friends and get with people all around the world in timed tournaments that earns huge rewards and have fun along the way. Get in the game and join your friends today. Download Monopoly Go now free on the App Store or Google Play. That's Monopoly Go, now available on the App Store or the Google Play Store. Thank you once again for making Locked On Cougars your first listen of the day. I want to remind you guys that the NFL mock draft is coming up April 17th at 7 o'clock Eastern time. That is 5 o'clock Mountain time for those of you here in Utah. Streaming on the Locked On Sports Today 24/7 streaming channel on YouTube. It'll also be on the free Amazon Fire TV channels app. It's an ultimate 6-episode series to break down everything that these NFL experts from the Locked On Network are drafting for every NFL franchise. They also have live reactions from us college football experts as well as fantasy football angles and the whole shebang. You guys know what I'm talking about. The Locked On NFL mock draft goes live April 17th, 7 o'clock Eastern time. Once again, 5 o'clock Mountain. It's available on the Locked On Sports Today 24/7 streaming channel on YouTube or the free Amazon Fire TV channels app. Check it out today. All right. Let's talk about Kevin Young and what the future is. So as I mentioned, he is going to stick around with the Phoenix Suns through the entirety of their playoff run. Now, I will say this just right off the bat. Go Minnesota Timberwolves. Now, it's easy for me to root for a guy like Rudy Gobert because I love Rudy, and now he's playing for the Minnesota Timberwolves. Also is a big fan of Mike Conley. So, you know who the first-round opponent is for the Phoenix Suns as the 6th seed? Oh, yeah, that 3 seed, the Minnesota Timberwolves. So go Timberwolves, knock them out, sweep them in 4 games, and get Kevin Young on his way to Utah. Now, I am being told, and what I have been told, is that Kevin Young was motivated to take this job at BYU because he is truly a family man. Was born in Salt Lake City. His wife attended BYU. She is from Utah. He also was born here, ultimately went to high school down there in Georgia, but he is obviously tied to the state by his faith, the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. He's a member of the faith. He and his wife, I saw on Wikipedia, were married in the Salt Lake Temple. So he's got all kinds of connections to the state. And it sounds like, based on what I was reading from Matt Norlander's piece, is that he believes it's in his best interest to maybe step back from the hectic nature of the NBA schedule. It's 82 games. It covers 12 months of the year, it feels like. The games themselves stretch across 7 months, and he wants to have a little bit maybe less in terms of the strain that being a coach is. Now, I'm not saying that the college game is any less stressful, but it has fewer games. Remember, in college, you can play probably 40 in a given season with the postseason all told, maybe north of that, maybe 41, 42 games, whereas the regular season for the NBA alone is 82 games. You add in 5 or 6 preseason games, and if you make a run in the playoffs, if you were to sweep through the NBA playoffs, you're playing at least 16 more, but you don't ever sweep through the playoffs. I don't think that's ever happened in NBA history, so that's beside the point. He is looking for a little more, quote unquote, work-life balance. He's got younger children, and as a dad who takes a lot of time away for his job, doing what I do in the media and this podcast, I can fully understand why he would want to have some more time with his kids. And the best part is he's being paid handsomely to take over this BYU basketball program. What does it mean that he is not going to be with the Cougars until his playoff run is done? Well, it says that he wants to put together a staff that can recruit right away. That screams to me that there's a pretty decent chance that unless Mark Pope is going to scoop up Nick Robinson, I would imagine that Nick Robinson is hired on this staff for Kevin Young, and he kind of plays point man, having the institutional knowledge, has been around the program, has been part of the recruiting efforts for BYU basketball, and he spearheads the early forays into the transfer portal to bring guys back from the transfer portal, and Dallin Hall, not Fousseyni Traore, excuse me, Ali Khalifa is the big man I was thinking of. Fous is not in the portal, let's be very clear. And then obviously Richie Saunders. You want to get those guys back out of the portal. You want to target some guys in the portal as well as keep going on the recruiting front. We'll talk about Colin Chandler's circumstance here momentarily because that's a separate deal, it feels like. But I think that is a good chance a guy like Nick Robinson gets this gig. Now, a number of you have reached out and said, Jake, what are the chances that Chris Burgess could end up on this staff? I'm not saying it's impossible. Because essentially the money that's being thrown around right now by Ryan Smith makes me think that anything is possible because everybody has a number. Let's be very clear. There's a number in my mind, and it's not as high as what Kevin Young apparently is going to get that would have me doing whatever that person wanted me to do if they wanted to pay me a certain amount. We all have that. If you don't say you don't, I think you're lying, because there would come a time there'd be a number that would say, you know what, I'll take that number. But regardless, I think that the thing is, if Chris Burgess wants to be a part of this staff and BYU wants him on the staff, I think that there is a price that he would come over as the associate head coach of the BYU basketball program, making a lateral move to BYU. I also don't think he's interested in that. That's just my gut feeling, because this is a guy who was up for the head coaching position. Like I said, the only formal interview went to Kevin Young. I was under the distinct impression that at minimum, Chris Burgess would get a formal interview. I know they had early talks, whether that's via phone call, text message, FaceTime, Zoom, whatever it was. They had early talks with BYU, but then things essentially dried up as BYU went all in on the Kevin Young angle and ultimately got their guy. So why would Chris Burgess, in my heart of hearts, this is me speaking, why would he want to go laterally to a program where he's going to work for a guy who's a little bit younger than he is and looks like he's set up for the long haul with a 7-year contract? Chris Burgess yearns to be a head coach. It's very, very evident that he wants to be the next head coach at a university, and we'd like to probably do it here in the state of Utah. Well, if he sticks around at Utah, there's a decent chance that if Craig Smith flames out in the next couple of years, he could end up as that head coach. So that is the interesting dynamic at play in all of this about the Chris Burgess angle. Is Barret Peery in the mix? TBD. Is Quincy Lewis in the mix? TBD as well. But I would imagine that BYU will kick all options, kick the rock over on all options and see what ultimately falls out. There was the report also from Matt Norlander that he plans to bring in, speaking of Kevin Young, to bring in a current NBA assistant with him as an assistant coach for him. I'll tell you that talking with enough coaches as I have over the years is that coaches know who they know and they trust the guys that they know. So that doesn't surprise me at all that he'd be bringing a current NBA assistant with him, whether it's somebody with the Suns or another franchise. I would be stunned if he didn't bring maybe more than one guy out of the NBA with him to the college game. But you do need to have guys who have worked in the college sphere. And I believe that Nick Robinson, just with the fact that he's been around the program, he's ostensibly still in Provo and still doing his thing to keep things together as best he possibly can, would be a very natural hire onto the Kevin Young staff, and let him, while Kevin Young is sorting out his run with the Phoenix Suns, allow Nick Robinson to kind of run point man here with the recruiting efforts for BYU. So a lot of moving parts, absolutely a ton of moving parts. There's a lot of hires to come because you can hire up to 5 assistants on this staff for BYU. And once again, if Ryan Smith is paying that much to Kevin Young, I would see no reason why there are not financial components in play to hire out the full complement of assistant coaches. And oh, by the way, I am fully expecting an influx of cash, whether it's from Ryan Smith or others. I would imagine it's more just others that are going to be excited about this hire because Ryan's already put a ton of money into the pot. I would imagine there's going to be an influx of NIL money coming the Royal Blue Collective's way as well as Coug Connect's way. So it feels like it's a win-win-win all the way around for BYU to have made this hire. And it sounds like despite the moving pieces of trying to get Kevin Young into Provo for a press conference and yada, 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 let Nick Robinson, with his institutional knowledge, be the guy to run things moving forward and make him one of the assistants on this staff. It seems like way too natural of a hire for me not to happen, but I would like to see a Chris Burgess. If he is inclined to make a move, great, go get him. If Barret Peery wants to come in from UNLV, absolutely hire him on. I love what Quincy Lewis offers as an X's and O's guys. He is absolutely a savant when it comes to the nuts and bolts of college basketball. So having him on the staff, I would be all in favor of any one or all three of them, frankly, joining the staff at BYU. So still a lot to be determined, a lot to be reported on. And of course, we'll have plenty of coverage for you guys here on Locked On Cougars. All right. Maybe the one downside of the day, though, is that Colin Chandler is headed to Kentucky. It's no if, and, or but about it. He has requested and received his national letter of intent, or the release from his national letter of intent, and he is headed to Kentucky to play for Mark Pope. How much of a gut punch is that for this BYU roster? We'll delve into that as we wrap up this edition of Locked On Cougars as we roll on momentarily. Today's show is brought to you by our friends over at Yahoo Finance. Now, here's the thing. This podcast wouldn't exist without sponsors like Yahoo Finance, who's a new sponsor here on the podcast. The best part is, for 25 years, Yahoo Finance has been the brand behind every great investor. Whether you're a seasoned investor, you're looking for that extra guidance out there is getting just started, like me, let's be honest. Yahoo Finance gives you all the tools and data you need in one place. They're the #1 finance destination, providing a holistic look at the financial news cycle, including breaking news, original editorial perspectives, analyst ratings, independent research, customizable charts, and so much more to make you the more in the know that you possibly can be when it comes to investing. We all want to be smarter with our money. Let's be very clear about that. You can securely link your brokerage accounts across a vast spectrum of the different providers out there for a unified view of all your wealth, including 401k and other investments. A comprehensive perspective is what sets apart great investors. It's how Yahoo Finance ensures that you have the right insight to look at your wealth in its entirety. With community over 90 million users every month using it, the real strength is helping you on your way to financial success, and they want to help you out if you aren't already using them today. For comprehensive financial news and analysis, visit the brand behind every great investment at yahoofinance.com, the #1 financial destination. That's yahoofinance.com. Check them out one more time. That's yahoofinance.com. Thank you once again for making Locked On Cougars your first. Oh my gosh, I am all off. But nonetheless, thank you for making it your first listen of the day. Do want to encourage you guys. We've had a nice uptick in our subscribers to our Locked On Cougars Insider group. If you'd like to be a part of that and get everything I am hearing and vetting in real time, that literally comes to your phone in the form of a text message, join us on our Locked On Cougars Insider group. Thanks to all of you who joined us over the weekend as news was really evolving on this basketball front. I'll just use a testimonial. One of them said, Jake, thank you so much for being on top of this and reporting in live time about this. I was able to update my friends all weekend long, and they were stunned I knew as much as I did, and it's all thanks to you. Hey, I don't take a ton of credit for it, but it is fun to have people like that in my corner. So if you'd like to be a part of the Locked On Cougars Insider group, join us. The links are in the show notes below. 14-day free trial, $5 a month afterwards. And like I said, live updates coming to your phone via text message. So get on it today. All right, let's talk about Colin Chandler. Now, before the news of the hire of Kevin Young just had Cougar Nation going over the moon, as it should. Well, there's a bit of a damper because Travis Branham from 24/7 Sports first reported, I believe, that Robbie McCombs had a report shortly thereafter from Vanquish the Foe that Colin Chandler, the top 50 prospect that BYU is very much looking forward to having on their roster going forward, he has requested and received his release from his national letter of intent, and he is instead going to enroll and play for the University of Kentucky and Mark Pope. Now, a lot of you have had questions over the 2 years that he's been out on a mission in London, England, saying, well, Jake, what are the chances with Chris Burgess' departure that he ultimately decides to pick Utah when he comes home? How much of a Mark Pope guy is he? Well, I think we got a real good insight into how big of a Mark Pope guy he is, because he spurned his hometown school that he had committed and signed with before his mission. He requested a release from his national letter of intent, and instead he's going across the country to Lexington, Kentucky to play for the Kentucky Wildcats. He is a Mark Pope guy through and through. And also, I'm sure there's a financial component with NIL that's playing into this. Now, I'm not saying that BYU couldn't compete because, like I said, I am expecting an influx in terms of the overall investment in NIL for BYU on the heels of that Kevin Young hire. But the nice part is I think that a guy like Colin Chandler is going to be taken care of down there in Kentucky. Would I have liked to have seen him in a BYU uniform? Abso-freaking-lutely. Why wouldn't you? He's a top 50 prospect. He is maybe the most NBA-esque guy that's come out of the Utah prep ranks in recent memory. He has got all of the skills that pay the bills, to use that old adage, and we'll see how he does at Kentucky. But it is a loss for the BYU roster to not have him coming home and coming to BYU. Kentucky will benefit from it. Obviously, he's going to take some time to get up to speed because, as we all know, mission rust is absolutely a thing, especially in basketball. For every guy that feels like they're a Jackson Emery who like steps off the plane and is ready to play right away, there's like 4 or 5 other guys that just struggle to get back in a year plus time. So I think Kentucky's going to have to be a little bit patient, and Mark Pope knows this as well as anybody. I'm sure Cody Fuger, who I'm still fully expecting, by the way, to go to Kentucky with Mark Pope. I believe that it is going to be interesting to see how they handle him coming home off that mission. And I just want to say it's a gut punch. It is absolutely a gut punch. And I understand why any BYU fan would be upset about him spurning the Cougars to look at other options and ultimately pick to go to Kentucky. But I think that he's doing what he feels is in his best heart, and he committed to Mark Pope. Here's the deal. There are guys who commit to universities, and as I understand it about a guy like Isaac Davis, for example, because Isaac and Colin were expected to come into BYU together this year. Now, Colin, a returned missionary, and Isaac, a high school graduating senior, coming in as a true freshman. Both of them were expected to join the program. But what I understand is that it's more of a deal where Colin was a Mark Pope guy. He wanted to play for Mark Pope. That's why he committed to BYU. He wanted to play in Pope's system. He wanted to be a part of his program. That's why he's going to Kentucky. From what I understand, the early returns on Isaac Davis is that he is a more of a quote-unquote BYU guy. He wants what BYU offers. He grew up in southeastern Idaho. He is a member of the LDS faith, just like Colin Chandler is. But Colin made his decision, and he's going to have to do what he's going to do. Isaac Davis, on the other hand, appears that he is more enthralled with BYU as a university. And there's always going to be that mix of those two types of guys. There will be Kevin Young guys in BYU's future as he runs his course here as BYU basketball head coach who are going to commit to him because he's Kevin Young and he has a connection to the NBA and he can get me to the next level, yada, yada, yada. But the other thing is there's other guys who just BYU is what they want. They want to be in Provo. They want to be at the university. They want to be a part of the BYU basketball program. That mix, it's critical to get it right to make sure you don't have too many of one side or the other. But I think the biggest thing is you wish Colin Chandler the best, and now you look forward to the future. I will add one other tidbit as we wrap up this edition of the podcast. Kevin Young's connections in the NBA obviously are going to help BYU in the recruiting sphere. There's no doubt about that. The fact that he can say, how about I call up Joel Embiid? How about I call up Kevin Durant? How about I call up Devin Booker over here? Whoever it might be when it comes to recruiting guys or guys on his roster that he wants to kind of let them get an insight from one of those NBA players. Well, what could he do for a guy like Jackson Robinson? I don't have any inside intel that Jackson Robinson has any intention of coming back to BYU. I have been adamant in saying that I believe he's going pro, and he very well still may be on that course. But if there is one person I believe that can make him second guess his decision to leave BYU, it may just be Kevin Young with those connections to the NBA and his work as a really, really highly thought of NBA assistant coach. He's one of the more highly thought of. He was paid $2 million to be an assistant coach in the National Basketball Association. He is very highly thought of. He's done a very good job as a coach. And could he get Jackson Robinson to reconsider and come back to BYU? That's a question to ponder, and I'll see if I can find out some more intel on that on our next edition of Locked On Cougars. So that's going to do it for this edition of the podcast. A big thanks to all of you who had to rush to get it out. So understand some of my foibles today, just getting the podcast out to you guys in a timely fashion, but it is a big day. It's to be celebrated. So congratulations once again to Kevin Young as BYU basketball's head coach. And we'll have plenty more to come as we, find out when he finally shows up in Provo, B, see what he does with his BYU basketball program. And of course, we'll have it covered top to bottom right here on Locked On Cougars.